what makes you get up in the morning? What drives you? What motivates you? How do you want to have an impact outside of yourself? So on your community or at work, um, or on the world, from a more larger perspective. And so the idea of this framework is that there's four things to think about: your strengths, your what you're good at, your interests, so what you're passionate or interested in, and the third area is what you care about. So this can be interpreted as your values or causes that you care about in the world. And the last area is where you can have the impact. So what the world needs.
Welcome, everybody. This podcast is all about you. Why knowledge matters. Welcome. I'm Yannick, your host, and now joining me, Olivier. Olivier is a career coach and someone who helps high achieving individuals to really find their path back to the highway. Welcome, Olivier, to the show. It's such a pleasure.
Thanks, Yannick, for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So let's start just quickly. So, what was your dream when you were a little kid?
Let's see. When I was a little kid, I would say my dream was I always wanted to be a teacher, which is funny because even though I didn't end up becoming a teacher, but now as a career clarity coach, I am in a way teaching people and mentoring people. And so it's took a while to get here in terms of my career path, but it's funny that when I think back about what I wanted to be as a kid, my dream was to be a teacher, and so I've come a little bit full circle now.
Yeah, that's beautiful actually. I mean, usually that's really the path, right? What we go through that really makes us grow. And you have a very interesting career in this sense. Went to great schools and everything. You got your dream jobs in 15 Fortune 50 companies, and basically had everything what you always wanted. But there was something in you that really said was kind of begging you inside out that really something is not right. And so walk us a little bit through what was first your initial, what was your goal, and why you wanted to go to grade school and then work for Fortune 50 company, for example. So what was your reasoning first and foremost?
Yeah, so growing up, I was always taught that you need to be the best, work hard, do your best in order to find success. And so that was something that my parents taught me, that society and schools, get good grades in school so that you can go to a good school. So yes, I ended up at Princeton for undergrad and later on Wharton for business school. And so yes, the Ivy League background. And with that in mind, it was always you're told, to go to good school, get good grades, so that you can get a good job at a Fortune 500 company for security, stability, and have that brand name on your resume. And so, while I did achieve all of those things, I always felt like something was missing. And at the beginning of my career, I really focused on gaining as much experience and building as much and learning as much as I could to learn and build up my skills. But I always in search of something more. And it wasn't until later in my career where when I look back, I was always looking for this idea of purpose and feeling like I was having an impact on something that meant something to me and it felt fulfilling. And so while I worked at Fortune 500 companies like JP Morgan right after undergrad, and then After business school, I worked at Google for 4 years. And these are big brand name companies. And yes, I did have an impact, but it was not impact in a way that felt fulfilling to me. And so I still kept searching for this through all of the career changes and pivots that I made. And it was always in search of this purpose or idea of fulfillment. And that led me to now become a clarity coach, where I essentially work with high achievers like myself, who essentially people who are in my shoes, where you've achieved success and on paper you look like you have the perfect resume or perfect job, but you still feel like something is missing, and you maybe you want to change your career or change your job, but you don't really know what to do next because you feel like you've done everything, you've checked off all the boxes, and so that lack of clarity is hard to figure out. And so my role as a coach now is to really work with these types of people to help them figure out what those next steps could look like for them in terms of their career.
What were some of your personally threats that you had that you felt like there is something more to life than working for, you know, a Fortune 500 companies, which is great. I mean, that's not to say that you should not really aim to do so. And a lot of people feel really really fulfilled. So I think it goes a little bit back of who we truly are, right? And to some extent we are, evolutionary speaking, just entrepreneurs, right? We were always hunter gatherers, and somehow that's kind of within. And it's, even though we think sometimes it's natural to actually work for a big organization, if we really look closely it is actually not. So, what do you think it
Mhm.
really stands out when it comes to your personality that you ultimately said, like, you know what, there's something more, but I do not know what it is yet?
Yeah. I think for me, I always felt like, so I worked in sales, in both at both Jake Morgan and at Google, and my career has been in sales. And so when I thought about it from that perspective, I've always thought about, well, I don't know if the world needs another salesperson. And when I think about the impact that I want to have, the Ikigai framework is often what I use and what I work with my clients on now. And the idea is to really think about what your strengths are, what you find, what interests you, where you want to have an impact, and what what is it that you care about. So with the intersection of that, that is how you find your purpose. And I think for me, when what I felt like was missing was the alignment of my interests and where I what I cared about and where I felt like I could have an impact. And at the big, large organizations, yes, I definitely had an impact, in my day to day work and what the companies are doing. But I always felt like I didn't have as much of a personal connection to that. Um, and so, finance is finance and Google is digital advertising. So, yes, the world does need that, but I didn't feel that personal connection to that. So, for me, it was about finding something that really resonated with my personal interests, where I felt like I was having an impact and more of a connection to the mission or the cause of the organization. That's what I felt like was missing. And so when I changed jobs and changed careers, I was searching for that. So after Google, I actually switched to a passion industry of mine. So I love travel. So I moved to a hospitality startup, and um, well, I was there for about a year where COVID, but unfortunately, I was only there for about a year until COVID hit. So, as everyone knows, the travel industry was very much impacted by that. So I got laid off during COVID, um, and and then I then switched industries to retail AI technology. And so I was always in search of this idea of something more that aligned more with me my personal interests as well as where I felt like I could have a connection to the company and the company's mission and products.
So I think it's really connection that really comes through, and even though sales is also really connection, right? I mean, sales, in my view, is really all about really life because no matter what you do, there's always an aspect of selling yourself, right? It's really important, you know. So in this sense, of course, but you were really looking for something more deeply. You wanted to serve somehow at the more personal level in order to really uplift people in order for them to find meaning and purpose. So now let's go to meaning and purpose because these are terms that are thrown a lot around. So please give us a taste what you mean by meaning and purpose and how do they somehow relate or not with one another, and then really lay out how you help your clients, especially high achievers, to find meaning and purpose. And then ultimately, we go back to this a little bit later on how to actually implement this and really have also the courage. And I'm also really curious how you did it. Okay, but for this now, just tell us about what you mean by meaning and purpose.
Yeah. So for me, I think purpose and meaning are pretty similar. I would say they're more or less interchangeable, I think. Um, and I think purpose can probably be extrapolated to a more overall general mean to kind of your feeling in life. And so whereas I think meaning might be a little bit more like fulfillment, to where you derive some meaning from it. Whereas purpose, I think, is a little bit more like um, what you feel you should be doing, and finding that purpose. But ultimately, I think they're more or less interchangeable. And so, how I usually define and purpose is really using the Japanese framework called ikigai. So what ikigai means in Japanese is a reason for being, and so it's essentially the meaning of life. So what makes you get up in the morning, what drives you, what motivates you, how do you want to have an impact outside of yourself, so on your community or at work, um, or on the world, from a more larger perspective. And so the idea of this framework is that there's four things to think about: your strengths, your what you're good at, your interests, so what you're passionate or interested in, and the third area is what you care about. So this can be interpreted as your values or causes that you care about in the world. And the last area is where you can have an impact. So uh, what what the world needs. When I first heard of this concept, I found this area to be really hard to define because the world needs a lot of things. But when you think about it from the perspective of um, where you can have an impact, then that feels a little bit more accessible. What the world needs feels a little uh, too existential. It's hard to think about that with where you have what your place is in that perspective. And so this is important because by figuring out the intersection of these four areas, and that is how you can essentially define your purpose and how you'll be able to find fulfillment. And one of these things, how that, what I was talking about before, is that it allows you to find a mission or big picture for your personal life to connect to. Um, and really understanding what that looks like and being able to apply that to not only work. You can find purpose through a lot of ways. Oftentimes we think about our career as one of the ways to do that. But for most people, it's oftentimes that is not where we actually derive our feeling of purpose. It can come through in other ways like hobbies or volunteer work, or even just, through your family and friends. That's how that can sometimes come through. But overall, I mean, ideally, I would say for me, we're all spending so much time at work, at least 8 hours a day, and so if you don't feel like you have purpose at work, then you're eventually going to feel dissatisfied and unhappy, and basically where I was, where you want to look for a change. Um, so yeah, so that's kind of how I would define purpose.
Why is that? That still, for most at least, I think we can, generalize this statement, is still work is not their purpose. When you think about it, as you just mentioned, we spend at least one third of our lives, almost one third of our lives, at work until
Mhm.
65. And the strange thing is too that retirement is really a new concept. I think it they started doing this. I think it was actually in the U.S. after World War II, where they realized that we all of a sudden we don't have enough like people. Jobs, so we have to, starting retiring people. And so, why do you think is that? Because when you really think about it, is that what really drives, people, your motivation, really life, is really everything comes from movement, right?
Mhm.
When we feel somehow fulfilled, it's not when we really lie in the bed. It's when we somehow engage with the world, whether it's intellectually or interpersonally, or or or, or at a more social level. So why is that, according to you?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is based on expectations from family, from school, from society, that um, a lot oftentimes when people start their careers, especially right after school, most people do it based on what they study. Their first job is usually based on what they study, and once they start down this path, they don't think about changing or moving away from that path, even though they may not like it as much anymore, or they change, and so people just end up staying stuck because they most of the time it really comes down to fear, the fear of change, the fear of starting over, the fear of failure. So all these fears often prevent people from actually making a change to align what they want with their job. And so this idea of finding purpose through work, oftentimes it does take time, because you really need to understand yourself and understand what you care about, your values, and where you feel like you can have an impact. And especially when someone is starting out at your beginning of your career, you may not know your strengths. And you're probably still developing your interests. So all of this often does take time, and reality is when you start working, oftentimes it ends up becoming not really exactly what you expected. And so I think the fear is often all these fears and is often what really hold people back from actually making a change.
How did you overcome the fear in order to find your purpose? You just mentioned, I think it's almost like you turned an adversity into an opportunity when it comes to your change, right, during COVID. So you were basically laid off. So how were
Yeah.
you able to overcome this fear? Of course, you went, to another job, with AI and stuff. But how did you ultimately overcome this fear that you are just talking about? Because that's a big thing.
Yeah, I would say it comes with taking risks. So forcing yourself to take risks. And for me, so the layoff that happened during COVID was actually my second layoff. My first layoff happened when I was at Google. And so I was at Google for about 4 years, and I worked really hard. I worked as hard as I could to try to get promoted or move up the corporate ladder, as everyone says. But no matter what I did or how hard I worked, I just kept hitting a ceiling, and I couldn't really advance my career there. And so eventually I got laid off because of a reorg where the company changed the leadership changed their mind on how they wanted the team to be structured. And so as part of that, I ended up getting laid off. And I had the opportunity to decide whether or not to stay at Google. Um, or I could take the severance package and leave. And so at the time, that was a lot of soul searching that I thought about. And I realized that I didn't feel valued when I was at Google. You know, all the work that I did, um, as much as hard as I worked, I couldn't get promoted, and I felt like I had to reach the ceiling, and so I didn't feel valued. And you know, here they're laying me off, so considered non-essential anymore. And so I felt like, why should I stay at a company that doesn't want me? Sure, there are different teams, but I felt like I had outgrown the company. And so I would say that was definitely one of the first setbacks from a career perspective where I felt like it was my first layoff, um, and I definitely went through all the emotions of anger and crying and like thinking my life was over. I've been laid off from one of at the time one of the best companies to work for, so where else could possibly be better? But I actually ended up deciding to take a year off, and I took a sabbatical. And I focused on personal passion projects. So I traveled, I did yoga teacher training, I even started a travel blog. And through that experience, I really focused on really understanding what I wanted, and especially what I wanted next for my career. And that's where I really started thinking about this idea of more impact and feeling more, finding more rewarding work. And I would say what helped me overcome these fears is really taking action to take those risks. And so everyone thought I was crazy to one leave Google voluntarily and take the severance instead of finding another role within the company. I was leaving that stability and security, and not only that, but also to take a year off from work. At the time, it was frowned upon to have a gap on your resume, and so everyone said that it'll be really hard to find a job, and I should really have something lined up. But I decided to take that risk and just follow my heart and follow my gut instincts. And so what I realized is that, yes, those risks were definitely still there, but at the end of the day, I was still able to find a job after that year off. And I realized that taking risks is not as scary once you start getting in the habit of taking risks. Then you're able to overcome these setbacks when you face them. And when I was laid off the second time, and then eventually a third time, the each layoff became less and uh, less frightening and less personal. And so that's how you for me, that's how you overcome these types of fears, is to really find ways to take risks and kind of face them head on. The other thing I really focused on was really knowing my strengths, and I knew that I would definitely be able to find a job. Worst case, I can, work at Starbucks. There's lots of jobs, and yes, maybe it's not exactly what I would want from a corporate career perspective, but from a financial perspective, it is scary, but there's definitely lots of jobs available that I could fall back on if I really, really needed to. And so when you put things into perspective and thinking about the fears that you have, oftentimes it's really just all in your head. And when you reframe those fears, that makes it a lot less scary.
Yeah, it's really what you're basically talking about is, and I think that's the biggest journey really, and that's a indigenous saying which really says like the longest journey is from our mind to our heart. It's really bring the two in alignment, and so that is beautiful. So walk us a little bit through about coaching, and what really makes you, most happy about it, and what you're specifically like passionate about coaching in your day-to-day work.
Yeah. 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 I call myself a career clarity coach because I'm helping high achievers who lack that clarity, and they have essentially had a lot of success, and they're looking to make a transition or change their career. They're essentially at a career crossroads where they feel like they want to make a change, but they don't know where or what to do next. So I essentially help them find that clarity. And how I do that is I really focus on three main areas. The first is purpose, that we've talked a lot about before, earlier just now. So helping them understand what their purpose is, and where they can find meaning in their life, not only life, but also career. And then the second area that I focus on is the alignment of values. And this is where oftentimes when we think about looking, especially in a career perspective, when we think about looking at the next steps for a career, it's often, of course, always about what the salary and benefits will look like. What is your title going to be? And yes, that is important, but there are also other things to think about. Things like company culture, who the manager will be, what your day to day role is, how does the work life balance, how would that look like? What would that look like? Um, and oftentimes, I think there's a lot of things that are important to think about, but they often get put on the back burner, and people don't think about them as they are job interviewing or doing their job search. And so this this alignment of what you care about, your values, it needs to be aligned with the opportunities and the work that you're doing. Um, and if there's any misalignment, and then that's where you start to feel dissatisfied and unhappy. And then the third area is around mindset, and that is really working through the fears that I've just mentioned, the fear of failure, the fear of the unknown. I think for high achievers, you're so used to being the best and doing the best, um, and the fear of failure is often the biggest fear to overcome because you've achieved so much success. It's this idea of either starting over or starting from scratch, is oftentimes one of those one of those fears, and it's helping them realize that you're not actually going to start over. Everything you've done up until now, you can leverage that in your in and make into the next um, change that you want to do. And that idea of, starting over and failing is often the fear. So working through those fears, and reframing the possibilities is that third area that I work with clients on.
It seems to me that this demand of really finding clarity and life coaching, for example, is just increasing. And what's also it's staggering in one way is the fact that we have coaches for everything, right? Hockey, soccer, football, and whatever. But we don't really have a coach for figuring out life, right? Which is really the most complex thing that you can ever do, right? It's like raising a kid. It's really complexity, right? There's so many variables you can't really just nail it down and find it quickly. So it requires also a huge amount of patience. And I think that's one of the problems I see, especially now nowadays, where because there is this immediate reward all the time. There's this social media, and people just think like, you know what, you can just get, quick fix, and you make it and it's there. But people don't really understand that everything that you see, if you watch the very best, looking at them, it always looks so easy. When I watch a Montreal Canadiens
Mm-hmm.
game, let's say, it just looks so easy. And I'm like, I can do it too. But that's why the great always make things look easy. And so, what do you think? Do you personally consider the biggest challenge when it comes to your client and generally when you look at society at large? Do you think that is a big challenge that people are less and less patient? Because, as you said, right, it's about growing as a human, and that takes time.
Mhm.
I truly believe there's nothing you cannot get and master any skill without at least putting 10 years of your focus into it. And if you're not really able and willing to put this effort into it, you will never ever get to the level where you really can stand out. You might be very good, of course, but you can never ever do it, as the pro really does it. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, I do think patience is definitely something that, yeah, in today's culture is often missing. Um, I think when it comes to career, patience can be part of it, but I think a bigger part is really, yes, you do have to work hard. I think nothing is an overnight a success. Nothing comes easy. You do have to work hard. But I think what oftentimes people confuse working hard and expecting success is, or what's missing from that mindset is that, yes, you do have to work hard, but you also need to understand where to work hard and when it makes sense. And if you're working hard in a job that you don't like, no matter how hard you work, you're never going to feel happy. Like the harder you work is not going to be make you feel happy. Um Happy about it. And it might actually be the reason why you're not finding success. Because there's something else that's missing. And so I think part of that idea of looking for what what that next thing looks like is to really understand yourself. And that sometimes does take time. I think people or society, we are very much anti-change, I think. Because we're afraid of change. And so there's these expectations that you have or are put on you from your parents or from society, from school, and then you feel stuck in that, and that you can't make a change after that. And so I think being able to understand and differentiate what you personally want from what is expected from you, that can go a long way to really helping you figure out if this is the right path for you, and whether you should be working hard and spending the time and the patience on this area that you're in. Because even if you do spend the time and the patience, if you don't find it satisfactory, then no matter how hard you work, you're never going to find that. So I think it really comes down to really understanding yourself and having that self awareness to differentiate between whether something whether you want something because you actually want it, or is it because of, you've been told that you want it.
What do you do when you face a really hard day?
Yeah, when I face a really hard day, Um, I really think about what I try to think about what was something good that happened. So if I have had a tough day, I do think about, okay, maybe I didn't achieve as much as I wanted, or I didn't get as much work done as I wanted. Well, focusing on the positive side, or looking at it from the opposite perspective, is what was I able to achieve? What was I able to do? Um, what was I able to accomplish? And if the answer is that I really can't find anything, then I start to also think about, okay, what is something that I'm grateful for, or what made what could make today great. So when you focus your mind on the things that you're grateful for, or the things that make today, the positive side of things, then that can help you get through that feeling of being a really tough day. And the idea of gratitude can be actually very motivating, because you start to realize there's more to life than just the the problems that you may be thinking about or dealing with that made the day tough.
Beautiful. What's the meaning, according to you, of life? You're talking a lot about finding purpose, finding meaning. And so, specifically, what do you think, more generally speaking, what is the meaning for whether it's individually or, at the large scale? What's really the meaning of life, generally speaking?
Yeah, I do think that the meaning of life really comes down to what what you feel, where you feel you can have an impact outside of yourself. A lot of times when you ask people what their greatest achievement or what they're most proud of, a lot of times if they have child, if they're a parent, their answer will most likely be their children. Um, and so if you think about it from, just life and perspective in general, it is that idea of where can you have an impact outside of yourself, whether that's through your family or through your friends, through your community, through hopefully through work. But feeling like you have an impact outside of yourself. So the idea of service to others, and it doesn't always have to be volunteer work or um, you know that type of meaning when it comes to service, but the idea that you're just serving someone other than yourself. And I think that is really what comes down to the meaning of life, because that is ultimately what drives the connection and community. And that is where I feel like people feel the most fulfilled.
Why do you think someone who is really in this position should actually go to a coach and really think this through with someone else and not do it on his own? What would you say is like the most powerful argument, besides of, just building connection is really important. We are always stronger, in community. What would you say is really important? Why should someone do it and really get a coach?
Yeah, I would say I think the idea of working with a coach is that the coach essentially acts as a neutral, unbiased third party for you to really talk and think things through. Um, yes, we have our friends and family that we can complain or rant to, but at the end of the day, they have a bias or a vested interest in you, and of course, they rightly should. But a coach can essentially be that neutral third party for you to help you talk things out, where maybe there are certain things you can share with that with your coach that you wouldn't necessarily share with your friends or family. And I think for some people, the follow up question is then, well, how is coaching different from a therapist? And my response to that is that a coach is essentially acting as a guide to work with you to think about your future or your next steps. A therapist is also helpful to help you help be that third party that's neutral and unbiased. But I think a therapist's role is really focusing on helping you understand your past or understand your how you operate, how you think, and how you work, and really unpacking that so you're more aware of that. Um, but they may not necessarily work with you closely to think about the future. And so I think that's the difference between coaching and therapy. And so a coach would help you essentially, okay, we know that this is how you think or how you work. So with that in mind, let's think about how to move forward and work with that. Whereas a therapist would probably say, okay, here are the things you can do to actually change this behavior or change this thinking process. Um, and so, yes, I would say working with a coach is essentially being able to have that third party person act as a guide to work with you to help you figure out what your next steps are, how to help you achieve the goals that you want. That is different than and acting in a different capacity than either your friends or family.
Yeah, it really makes sense, right? I mean, especially when we are young and go through schooling and so on, it makes sense to just get, certain basic education and, that everyone more or less has. So we are basically equal playing grounds. And then ultimately, we scale things up and then, help and ask for help and then really can change potentially gears. I think it's really normal today, right? I mean, the only constant really is change, right? And it's also somehow weird that we have, of course, it makes sense, there's an underlying, as you mentioned, right, there's an underlying fear of, that's why we don't really embrace change. But it's really, change is really time, right? I mean, it's kind of hard to even define time, but if there is no change, well, we don't wouldn't even somehow be aware of time, I would even say. So that is so important, and I think it's crucial for everyone who really wants to accelerate and really improve his or her life, right? I mean, here it's really about uh, enjoying and living really the best what you have within and really bring it to the very fore. Last question, Alice. What makes you truly feel alive?
Um, I think for me, it comes back to the idea of like, learning and experiencing new things. When I think about what makes me feel excited, and it's always about learning something new or looking for new experiences. That's why I love travel. I'm always looking for new adventures, and looking just for new experiences, art, going to art museums or shows. And that's from like a personal perspective. But when I think about career and work, that's also definitely what drives all the career changes that I've made, is looking for ways to learn new things and try new industries or new roles. And ultimately that goes back to the idea of taking risks. So taking risks both from a personal perspective in terms of looking for adventures or trying new things, as well as taking risks from a career, from professionally, where I, again, looking for new roles to continue that learning. And so I think for me, we're at when I feel alive and excited is when I'm taking risks and learning and trying new things.
Beautiful. So, if you want to really accelerate and really improve your life, your quality of life, your sense of being, then get in touch with olliecoaching.com. I believe I got it right. And really, everyone can really get in touch with you but on, olliecoaching.com. Am I right?
Yes, yeah. If people are interested in learning more about what I do and how I work as a coach, definitely feel free to check out my website, aliciacoaching.com. Um, and you'll find more about the coaching that I do. I also have a free career checkup guide there that you can download, where you can essentially do a pulse check on whether your career is currently the right fit for you, and understand what your priorities are. And yeah, and just learn more about me. If anything I've talked about is interesting or resonates, I'm happy to get in touch. And I also offer a free vision call, essentially to help talk through and figure out what that career vision would look like for you. And so that's a free call that you can also book with me there.
Ollie, thank you so much for being on the show. It has been such a pleasure and really all the best. And make sure keep in touch.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Annika. It's been a pleasure to be here and answering questions. I've enjoyed our conversation.
Always, yeah. That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.whyKnowledgeMatters.com. d-ykm.com. Meant to make you grow.